G'day YouTubers, and welcome to another episode in the Northern Moreton Bay series. I didn't get as far as I thought I would in this episode. In fact, I might run another 1 or 2 episodes in this series. I do want to tie it up this year. I don't want to run it over into the next year. I've already made one mistake in that I started a second series on boating tips and tricks and safety and things like that. And I found that I haven't had time to run both series. So I want to finish this series up this year. I want to go back to that series and do another couple of episodes on that, and then I want to start on the offshore series. So probably the next year or 2 is planned out, and hopefully I'll get some fishing in between times. So without further ado, let's roll this episode. I've picked this group of marks up, I think mostly over the internet over the years, but I've got some pretty strong evidence to back up the fact that these marks are good. And we'll come to that shortly. In the meantime, I'll just run through the marks. I'm trying out a new idea for showing you the marks rather than just put them up in a table. I've got a call out on them in the video. See how that works. I've been reading up on doing videos, and they say you should keep something happening on the screen to make it more visual, and I thought this might be one way to do it. If you really don't like it, let me know in the comments below and I'll go back to the old style. I'm still learning about all this photography and video stuff. I've never been a picture taker, but hopefully I'm learning. I think they're certainly better than they were when I first started a few years ago. Just while we're here, I want to have a look at the area around Scarborough Beach in a little bit more detail on Google Earth. There's Drury Point in the south and Scarborough Point in the north, and they're a couple of very good landmarks. They stand out well from the water, or at least so I'm told. I was given some directions on this many years ago, and I found them recently. I'll just share them with you now. As you can see, there are a couple of compass bearings off Drury Point and Scarborough Point that supposedly put you on a really great fishing spot. And looking at the marks that I've already put up, and Google Earth where it shows there looks to be something of a reef or something down there, and also if you look on something like the Navionics app, you can see that it's quite a shallow area with a drop off around it. That does look like quite a good fishing spot. And just while we're in the area, there's some shallow reefy structure. You can see it in Google Earth just around those points. I certainly wouldn't be overlooking that as a possible fishing spot. So if you're in the area, go in, have a look around there. It is shallow, so be careful. It looks as though some of those rocks there might break, at least at low water. So as I say, just be careful going in there if you're not familiar with the area, but I'd certainly be checking them out. Also, over the years I've been told that you can beach fish these reefs. They look to be close enough to the beach. I'm not sure whether these are the reefs I've been told about, but I have had people tell me that there's reefs up in this area at the points along Red Cliff Peninsula where you can get the line out to the reef from the beach. I'm not sure about that because whenever I fished up there with my parents and maybe my grandfather as well, we always fished the sandy beaches because, well, they always targeted flathead, whiting and brim. I don't know that they ever knew there was any other fish because that's all they ever wanted to catch. But anyway, I think those reefs are worth a look. If you're beach fishing, just go and have a look and see if you can get out to them with a line or even out near them with a line if you're wanting to target some snapper. There's some rock walls here as well with some walkways along the top of them. I certainly wouldn't be overlooking them as a potential shore-based fishing spot either. I'll just point out I don't fish from the shore anymore. Not because it's not good fishing. I really enjoyed my fishing as a young child from the shore, but once I discovered baits and how much I like being on the water, that's just where I like to fish from. Before we leave, we'll just check the area out in the Navionics app just to reiterate what I've been saying. As you can see, roughly around that area that I've been talking about, the Navionics app shows a rise off the bottom. And if we apply the marks that this old fella gave me, you can see that that comes out on that spot that Navionics shows is rising up off the bottom, and does look like a very likely fishing spot. I suppose you've got to remember that these marks were given to me probably 40 odd years ago, so things could change in that time. I'm certain the old bloke that gave them to me would be long gone by now, but when he gave them to me, he thought he was giving me gold. and I'm sorry that I just haven't made it up there to try the marks out yet. Maybe one day. Anyhow, we better keep moving on to some new marks because we'll never get through them otherwise. I was pretty young when we went up to the Redcliffe Scarborough area. My parents took me up there fishing, probably 5, 6, 7-ish maybe. So it's hard to remember back then, but I remember Mum used to get some worms on the beach, and this mark here seems likely to be the beach. I remember it wasn't a great beach for sand, and just looking on Google Maps, I think this is probably the one, but as I say, I was that young, I don't know, and other people since then have told me any of the beaches around here will produce worms. Again, don't know for sure. Before we move on to some more marks, I just want to have a quick look here at this area between Scarborough Beach and Queen's Beach North. The locals might consider it to be part of one or the other, but to me I just consider it to be a separate section of beach. There's a rock groin at the north and south ends of the section of beach, and if we zoom right in on it, there's a lot of dark areas in the water. It's hard to tell from an aerial photo just exactly what they are, but looking at the historical imagery of it, I think they might be weed beds. If they are, they're worth going in and having a look at for some squid. In closer to the rock groins is also probably going to be a good area to fish. And if you're fishing shore-based, I'd certainly go out on them and give that a go. As for the marks themselves, I think most of these came off the internet. I don't recall anyone giving me any of this particular section. I generally read the fishing forums a lot, sometimes the fishing magazines, and every now and then someone puts up a mark and says try here. So I jot it down to use as a starting point to search. If you're trying any of these marks out, remember your sounder is your best friend. Go around the mark, see if there's anything there. Okay, and this is the Queen's Beach section. I don't know why they just call it Queen's Beach, and we've got Queen's Beach North. I would have thought this would be Queen's Beach South, but according to the map it's not. All that aside, it is interesting. There's a lot of dark areas in the water, and the dark areas that are around the two rocky groins that are sticking out to the north and south of the beach, I think are rocked. I've had a look through the Google Earth historical imagery, and I'm pretty certain that there's rocks around those groins. The dark areas in between the groins, however, I'm pretty sure that's weed. So anywhere around the groins of those rocky areas, great place to fish by the looks of it. And in between there's some weed beds, you probably get some squid off. We'll zoom in a second and have a closer look at the groin at Osbourne Point. Point out that both groins have some walkways out along them, so if you're land-based fishing, I wouldn't go past them. Give them a go for sure. You just have to suss out which tides are the best time to fish them. And usually with groins you'll find that one side of the groin will work best on one tide and the other side on the other tide. We'll just zoom in and have a closer look at the groin around Osbourne Point and the rocky reef that surrounds it. This first image was taken in October 2014, and there's no way of telling what the tide was at the time it was taken, simply because I don't know what time it was taken. However, you can see some white water there, so this reef is breaking, and whether it's at low tide or high tide doesn't really matter. The point is, if you're not familiar with the area and you're going in there for the first time, be extremely careful and keep a good eye on your sounder. You don't need to be right on top of the reef, and be back off it a little bit and just cast in near it. In these next three images, the water was extremely clear on these days and it gives you a very good idea of the structure of the reef down below. The images themselves range from September 2015 to February 2017 and then August 2017. This last image is from September 2017, and it looks like the tide's a bit higher than that original image because the white water is just around one particular part of the reef. So I'm guessing that the first image was taken at a lower tide than this last image, but nevertheless be extra careful when you're going in if you're not familiar with it. I feel the need for a little bit more Moreton Bay history. I haven't done any for the last couple of episodes, and I just want to touch on Redcliffe because it's pretty interesting in itself. Matthew Flinders named Redcliffe after the colour of the cliff faces when he visited Moreton Bay in 1799. In 1823, Governor Brisbane gave John Oxley the job of finding a spot that was suitable to establish a northern penal settlement, and he came into Moreton Bay and decided that Redcliffe was just the ideal spot. From what I've read of his report, it was mainly because the ships could get in close to the shore to unload. There must have been a fairly pressing need to establish a northern penal colony, and I suspect that was probably to have a settlement there to prevent another country coming and claiming part of Australia. In any event, on the 1st of September 1824, a ship set sail from Sydney under the command of Lieutenant Henry Miller with 14 soldiers on board, some of them with their wives and children, and 29 convicts, and they made up the first settlement at Redcliffe. It seems to be pretty common in those days that they'd pick a settlement site on one or a few criteria, but they didn't take the whole site into consideration because the Redcliffe settlement only lasted a year, and it was moved to North Quay in Brisbane mainly because there was a more reliable water supply at North Quay. If you read the history around Australia, there's several spots around Australia where they established a settlement and then moved it because there was no water. By the 1860s, Redcliffe had become a pastoral district, and by the 1880s, it started to boom as a seaside resort town. It was 1878 when the first subdivision was sold, and it started to become a residential area. In December of 1880, Patrick O'Leary from Fortitude Valley bought a plot of land in Redcliffe Parade and began his erection. I kid you not. That's how they spoke about it in those days. He erected a hotel on the site, and that opened in 1881. It's been modernised since then, but in the present day that is the Ambassador Hotel. Just going back to the terminology used in those older times, I can never forget reading one speech, and I can't remember where it was or what it was about, but it described someone's magnificent erection, and they were talking about a building that he'd just built. Schoolboy humour, but I chuckle about it every time I think about it. From 1911 onwards, the excursion steamer Cooper made regular trips to Redcliffe Jetty. The principal route for passengers, though, was by steamer from Sandgate Pier to Woody Point Pier. It wasn't until 1935 that they completed the Hornibrook Bridge that connected Clontarf to Brighton. Clontarf, of course, being in the town of Redcliffe and Brighton being in the city of Brisbane. Of course, building the bridge put the steamers out of work because people could drive there by car and they didn't need to take the boat trip. On the plus side, it heralded a boom time for development in Redcliffe. And of course, no history of Redcliffe would be complete without mentioning the Gibb family, who emigrated from Manchester in 1958 and went on to call Redcliffe home. I expect everyone knows who they are, but just in case you don't, there were 3 boys named Barry, Robin and Morris, and they went on to become the Bee Gees, quite a famous singing group with some great songs. I'll put a stop to the history there. It's given you some of the highlights, and if you're interested, there's plenty of information out there on Google. You can go and find some of it and have a read for yourself. And that's it for this episode. I'm trying to keep them a little bit shorter. I think they were getting a bit long. I think there's a lot of really, really good fishing areas around Redcliffe area. There's good fishing areas all around Moreton Bay, but the thing I really like about the Redcliffe area is just how concentrated they are. So many opportunities to go fishing so close to the ramps. Always been a bit jealous of up there and had a great time up there fishing from the beaches when I was a kid. And one day, hopefully, I'll get back up there with the boat and spend a little bit more time around those close-in reefs. That remains to be seen. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for taking the time to watch this. Until next time, good fishing.